Welcome back to the channel. I am Scott, and I'm excited today. I improved myself with technology. I know what you're thinking. Scott, you look just as bad as you did in the last video. Okay, it wasn't my image I improved, even though we need work there. It was really my delivery, my industry. It's something that I know very well. Let me explain. I've been in the recruiting industry for over 30 years. I know, it makes me old. I'm an industry veteran or an industry dinosaur. I've negotiated compensation for people around the globe for over 30 years. Now, my compensation was based on what I could negotiate for people. So I spent a lot of time, a lot of effort, training classes, psychology of selling, psychology of negotiation, digging in deep, improving myself with everyone to make sure I was the absolute best I could be at negotiating. Now, I spent the majority of my career on LinkedIn. When LinkedIn came into, my career dates pre-LinkedIn, so I'm that old. But I spent a lot of my career on LinkedIn, on hunting people, finding people, working that. And last year, I put together a LinkedIn live event, one of my first on LinkedIn's. So it's a live stream event, and it was titled Negotiating Like a Boss or Negotiate Like a Boss. I'll put a picture here if I can find one. In the end, I got over 1,000 people that attended this event. It blew my mind. I expected it to go 30, 40 minutes. I want to say it went almost 2 hours long. I wanted to teach information, so I took notes. I wrote notes down prior to the event. I wrote details on what I wanted to cover in Scott's scribbles. Okay. So it made no sense to anybody but me. I took these notes, but at this event, I opened the door for questions. If somebody had questions, I'd answer whatever the questions. That's why it dragged on for so long. There were so many people. I just opened the door. I didn't ever shut it. If somebody had a question, I'd answer their question if I could. But I know LinkedIn had a timeout at, I want to say 2 hours. So we pushed those limits. But I think that event was extremely successful. And here I am a year later, and I dug up my notes thinking, let me make a video on what I kind of covered in that class, but I didn't know really how to put it together. My notes were really a scribble. They didn't make sense to anybody, but I took my notes and I put them, copied and pasted them with no other details into Google's new Notebook LM AI technology. And I said, make it a podcast. And I was surprised at the results. I want to say 99% of this is fantastic. The other percentage was the creative liberty that Google took in putting this together. But all the details in here and some of the facts and all those things came from my notes. It organized them. It pulled them out. And it delivered them in a very credible way. It turned my notes into an NPR type radio podcast thing. And I think it sounds good. But what I want to do is show you, I'm going to deliver this here on this YouTube video. Now there are no visuals to the Google AI tool. At least I'm not there yet. But I want to put it into this video, and I want you to listen to this. It took my notes, it turned it into the podcast, and honestly, this is fantastic material. It made it sound better than me. Now, you've heard me talk. Now listen to this. We'll play this through, and then I'll come on at the end and give you my 2 cents on this. But this is fantastic information for anyone that is interested in negotiating with a job or their spouse or their kids. This is great information. It's notes, it's my experience, and it's communicated in a way that makes me sound pretty good. So listen to this.
Okay, so you want to talk negotiation. That thing that most of us, I think it's safe to say, would rather avoid, right? Like
Yeah.
a tax audit or going to the dentist.
Right.
But the reality is it's a skill that can really impact our lives in a big way, from our careers, obviously, to personal relationships, everything.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily for our listeners, we're diving deep today into an audio training session
Yeah.
that's packed with real-world tactics to help you negotiate with confidence.
And it's not just about, those high-powered, million-dollar deals in boardrooms. We're talking about those everyday negotiations that we all face.
Right.
Whether it's, asking for a raise or, deciding, what to do on a Friday night with your partner.
Yep.
Or even, haggling at a flea market.
It's funny how we don't even realize we're negotiating all the time in those small little ways.
Right.
But the source material claims that a staggering, are you ready for this? 99% of people dread negotiation. They just dread it, feeling stressed and underprepared. So most of us could use a little boost in this department.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just about, the feeling of being uncomfortable, right? It's like not negotiating effectively can have significant consequences in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine accepting a salary that's far below your market value, right?
Ouch.
Or missing out on opportunities because you were, hesitant to speak up.
Yeah, that's a painful thought. It really is. That avoiding this idea of negotiation can actually cost us.
Mm-hmm.
So how does this training suggest we approach this often dreaded skill?
Well, I think it starts by, kind of debunking this myth, right? We tend to think of a successful negotiator as this, aggressive, like hard bargaining type.
Right.
But, the source actually argues that a calm, soft, and friendly approach can be much more disarming and effective.
It's interesting. It's almost counterintuitive.
Mhm.
So how do you create this calm, soft, and friendly persona during a negotiation, especially when you're feeling anything but?
Yeah, I think it's about mastering the art of, subtle communication, right? Thinking about your words, thinking about your tone, making sure that you're using body language that is actually, genuine and engaged. And really the goal here is to project that confidence, but without, resorting to sort of like that stereotypical, aggression.
So assertive but not overbearing.
Exactly.
I like it. This training goes even further, right? It talks about the why.
Yes.
The why behind the negotiation. What does that even mean?
Well, it's about kind of going a layer deeper. It's not just about the offer or the request on the table. It's about understanding the motivations on both sides. So, for example, let's say you're applying for a new job, right? The why is this company even hiring for this role to begin with? Like, what problem are they trying to solve?
Yeah.
And then for you, what's your why? Why do you want this job?
I can see we're understanding that motivation can be valuable in a negotiation.
Right.
So we're not just talking about dollars and cents, we're talking about the motivation behind it.
Exactly. And when you understand the why, it allows you to kind of tailor your approach, right? To create a solution that actually works for both sides rather than just, going back and forth just on terms, right? It's like, it's the difference between playing checkers and playing chess.
Okay. That's a good analogy. But let's get real for a moment.
Sure.
Many of our listeners are probably terrified of negotiation,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to things like salary discussions. Does this training offer any, quick wins for those of us who just break out into a cold sweat at the mere mention of even having to negotiate?
So there's this one, I love this. It's like a one-line power move that they recommend. Even the most, negotiation-averse person can master this, I think.
Okay.
And that is when you're presented with a job offer, you simply ask, how much flex do you have on this offer?
Oh, I like that. Short, sweet, to the point. Doesn't sound intimidating, which I imagine is the beauty of it.
Mm-hmm.
How does such a simple question shift the power dynamic?
Well, I think it just subtly reminds everyone that this is a negotiation, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a decree. You're not just accepting whatever's thrown your way. And by asking about their flexibility, you're kind of politely indicating that, you're not necessarily willing to settle for that first offer.
You're planting a seed
Exactly.
without rocking the boat.
Right.
Very clever.
Mm-hmm.
This training also talks about the fact that tactics are really only effective when paired with being prepared.
Absolutely. Yeah. Preparation is key. And, one of the most important things you can do is research those salary ranges.
Right.
For similar roles, websites like Glassdoor, PayScale, H-1B data. They're really good resources for getting those numbers.
So no more going in blind, hoping for the best.
Yeah.
Knowledge is power. How do you actually bring this research to the table without seeming like you're holding a printout of Glassdoor salaries hostage?
Right. You don't want to be confrontational about it, but you can weave it in subtly. So instead of, saying, well, Glassdoor says I should be making X, you could say something like, based on my research, it seems that the salary range for similar roles is typically between this and this. Does that align with your budget?
I see what you did there. You're not making demands, you're more presenting your findings.
Exactly.
Which feels more collaborative.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about that fear factor.
Mm-hmm.
We've emphasized that preparation is super important. We've even learned how to sprinkle in our research without being confrontational about it. What other negotiation gems does this training offer? So we're back, and we're continuing our deep dive into the world of negotiation, figuring out how to handle those conversations gracefully, like you said, with confidence.
Yeah, and we left off on a kind of daring note, this whole idea of talking about compensation early in the interview process.
Right. Like maybe even in that first conversation, which kind of goes against the whole, traditional wait-and-see approach to salary. So is this like a genius move or a recipe for disaster?
Well, it's definitely a fascinating dilemma, I think. And like most things in negotiation, the answer is not always so black and white.
Right.
But let's explore both sides, right? So on the one hand, bringing up compensation early on can actually be super efficient. Think about it. You avoid, going through multiple rounds of interviews for a role that might not even, match your financial expectations.
It's like ripping off the Band-Aid.
Yeah.
You're addressing that elephant in the room right away.
Yeah.
And then you can just focus on the actual work.
Exactly. And it also signals to the employer that you're serious about finding the right fit, not just professionally, but, financially as well.
Okay, so I'm seeing the upside here.
Yeah.
But let's address the potential risks, because I'm sure there are some. I imagine in some situations, bringing up salary too soon could backfire.
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest risk is probably that it could be perceived as, overly aggressive or maybe even a little inappropriate, especially depending on the company culture.
So how do you know?
Yeah.
How do you read the room and determine if having that early compensation conversation is the right move?
Right. Well, I think context is key. So, doing your research on the company culture, trying to understand their hiring process, that can give you some valuable clues. And I think also, paying close attention to the flow of the conversation.
Right.
Reading the interviewer's cues, all of that can kind of help you gauge their receptiveness.
Okay, so being adaptable and, picking up on those social cues, subtle as they may be. So let's say you've decided it is okay to have that money conversation early on. How do you approach the topic gracefully without sounding demanding or, putting the interviewer on the defensive?
Yeah, well, the audio training, it actually offers some really, I think, helpful strategies for this exact situation. Instead of just blurting out your desired number right off the bat, you could try a more, nuanced approach.
Okay.
For example, you could say something like, I'm really excited about this opportunity, and to make sure it's mutually beneficial, I'd love to, chat about compensation expectations at some point. Would that be okay?
Right. So you're kind of putting it out there, but you're also giving them an out.
Exactly.
If it's just a complete no-go at that point.
Right. And I think it also just shows that you're confident, but you also respect their process.
Okay, so they're open to having this conversation. How do you actually bring up the numbers without it sounding like an ultimatum?
Well, remember that line, how much flex do you have on the offer?
Oh, I do, yeah.
So the training suggests a similar tactic for those early discussions. So instead of, just flat out stating your desired salary, you could frame it as more of a question, right? So you could say something like, based on my research, it seems like the salary range for these types of roles is usually between this and this. Does that align with, your budget for this position?
Okay, so again, it's more of a collaborative thing. You're not saying, this is what I want. You're like, hey, does this work?
Exactly.
What if they're being a little cagey and they don't want to disclose the budget that early on? How do you get a read on their expectations without it becoming this back and forth guessing game?
Well, that's where I think what questions can be really, really powerful.
Okay.
So the training talks about how what questions can be much more effective than why questions, which can sometimes make people feel defensive.
I've never thought about the difference between what and why when it comes to negotiation, but it makes a lot of sense. So how does that shift In the way that you ask questions, how can that actually change the tone of a negotiation?
Yeah, I think it's all about, again, fostering that sense of collaboration, that understanding. So instead of saying, why is the salary range so low? Which, that might trigger some defensiveness.
Right.
You could ask something like, what are the factors that usually influence the salary range for a role like this?
Okay, so you're showing genuine interest.
Exactly.
You're not just like, well, why am I not getting paid more? You actually want to understand, like, how does this work?
Right, and it shows that you're trying to understand their perspective. And that can go a long way. The training calls this tactical empathy.
Tactical empathy, I love that. It's like you're being strategic, but you're also being empathetic at the same time. But we all know negotiation isn't just about the words that we use, right? There's a whole nother layer.
Oh, for sure. 100%. And it's a layer that we often overlook. The training actually reminds us that a whopping 93% of communication is nonverbal.
Wow. 93%.
Yeah, so our body language, our tone of voice, our facial expressions, they all speak volumes.
Sometimes even louder than our words.
Exactly.
So how do we make sure those nonverbal cues are working for us and not against us in a negotiation? And we're back, talking about all things negotiation, and this time we're tackling that nonverbal communication piece. So it's not just what you say, it's how you say it.
It really is. It's amazing how often people just completely, overlook those nonverbal cues.
Yeah.
But they can make or break a negotiation.
Yeah, it's like we're sending out these subconscious signals.
Mm-hmm.
So let's decode them. What are some of those nonverbal things that people might be doing that are actually hurting them?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is posture. Slouching, crossing your arms, like all that kind of stuff. Even if you have great points and you're very articulate, it can really convey a lack of confidence.
It's like your body's betraying your words.
Exactly.
So posture. What else?
Eye contact or lack thereof.
Right.
If you're not making eye contact, it can make you seem untrustworthy or, like you're not really interested.
Mm-hmm.
But then on the other hand, too much eye contact can be a little,
intense.
Yeah, intense or even a little creepy.
Right. So finding that sweet spot.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance.
And all those little nervous sticks too, right?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like those don't help.
No, they can be super distracting. Tapping your foot, clicking your pen, touching your face. You want to try to, again, project that sense of calm and composure.
Which is easier said than done when you're in the heat of the moment.
Ah.
But okay, so we're sitting up straight. We've got good eye contact. We've banished the nervous tics. What about the voice?
Yeah, so tone of voice is huge, right? Because, if you speak too quickly, you might sound nervous.
Mm-hmm.
If you speak too slowly, it can almost sound condescending.
Right.
And then there's the volume.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to whisper.
Right, you don't want to whisper, but you also don't want it to come across as, overly aggressive.
Right.
So again, it's all about finding that balance. You want to sound clear, you want to sound confident, but you also, don't want to be overbearing.
So there's so much to think about. It's like you almost have to be like a nonverbal ninja.
Yeah, you kind of do. But like anything else, it's a skill you can develop. Just being more mindful of your own body language, maybe practicing in front of a mirror or with a friend, those things can help.
Those are great tips. And, I think it's important to remember that this audio training is it's a jumping off point. Right?
Totally.
There are so many different negotiation strategies and techniques out there.
Yeah, for sure. But at the end of the day, negotiation, it's a skill. It really is. And like with any skill, the more you practice it, the better you get at it.
So true. Well, here we are at the end of our negotiation deep dive.
It's gone so fast.
I know, right? We talked about that fear factor, how to prep, sprinkle in that research without sounding demanding. We even dug into those nonverbal cues, which I think was super interesting.
Yeah, and I think the key takeaway here is that negotiation doesn't have to be this big, scary thing.
Right.
It's really about advocating for yourself while also trying to understand, where the other person's coming from and just trying to find a solution that works for everyone involved.
I love that.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. So the next time you're facing down a negotiation, whether it's asking for that raise or dealing with, a tricky conversation with a family member, just remember what we talked about here today.
Yeah, and you know what? Every interaction is a chance to practice and to hone those skills.
You've got this.
You do.
And until next time, happy negotiating, everybody.
Wow. It really, they did a great job. Like, and I say they like it's a real person. Google's AI tool is a fantastic tool. Now I'm going to experiment on using it, because they can say things better than I can in more concise, entertaining, conversational manner. I'm going to take notes that I have and I'm going to turn them into other podcasts. Let me know what you think. Am I cheating the system? Maybe, but I think this helps everybody. It doesn't have the visuals, but I'm not there yet. I think they have a visual tool that I have to play with, but thank you very much for watching. And I'm going to host other live events. We'll do this live question and answer. I know on a podcast, you can't ask questions, but I'm going to do other LinkedIn live events where you can ask questions, and we'll see if we can work through this together, because I really sincerely want to help people. And if this tool can help me help people, I'm going to use it. And I think I will. I'll experiment with it a little bit. But thank you very much for watching. Have a great day.